Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful family. If you fiercely believe that absolute karma always successfully collects its highly massive debts, and you absolutely love highly explosive stories of ultimate revenge and pure realization, you absolutely must hear this incredible story. Please smash that like button to strongly support our content, subscribe to our channel, and let me know exactly what you would do if you found out your partner turned off their phone during a family emergency down in the comments below. Let's get directly into the price of 3 missed calls. Part 1. The toxic silence. The highly bright notification light perfectly on the highly expensive iPhone violently blinked exactly one highly frantic time. A completely silent, incredibly frantic, pure pulse entirely. In the highly dim, romantic light entirely of highly exclusive Suite 4. O2 entirely in the massive Ritz-Carlton, entirely in massive Manhattan. Julian Vance absolutely did not actively look completely directly entirely at exactly it. He was way too incredibly highly busy, highly seductively tracing his strong finger completely around the highly delicate rim, entirely of a highly expensive crystal glass, entirely of vintage champagne, and beautifully smiling directly at the beautiful woman, safely sitting directly opposite completely from them. Vanessa Romanova. She was absolutely everything. Exactly that his highly boring, predictable life, completely at home, absolutely was not. Incredibly spontaneous, highly dangerous, and highly toxically demanding absolutely nothing, completely except entirely for his highly undivided, absolute attention. She flawlessly wore a highly expensive silk designer robe, incredibly slightly highly seductively, falling completely off her delicate shoulder. Her piercing dark eyes intensely looked directly at him, completely with highly predatory, toxic adoration. You highly solemnly promised that you would highly aggressively turn exactly it completely off? Vanessa whispered incredibly softly. Her toxic voice was exactly like highly soft, dark velvet. She highly smoothly nodded completely in the highly direct direction entirely of the expensive phone, perfectly on the highly polished mahogany nightstand. Absolutely no highly boring work. Absolutely no highly pathetic wife. Absolutely only us. Julian highly casually glanced directly at the expensive device. The bright screen completely, violently lit, completely up, completely anew. Clara, wife. Highly brightly flashed perfectly on the bright display. He profoundly felt a highly momentary, sharp prick, entirely of highly toxic irritation. Clara, his highly devoted wife, entirely of absolutely already exactly 8 agonizing years. She was highly likely, highly annoyingly calling entirely to highly pathetically ask exactly if he had completely forgotten entirely, to highly responsibly pick completely up the highly expensive clothes completely from the elite dry cleaners. Or highly possibly. Little Timmy, or Timur, was completely once completely again, highly stubbornly refusing entirely to highly healthily eat his green vegetables. It was highly boring, pathetic domestic routine. Exactly the highly exact same pathetic thing, completely from which he was highly actively fleeing. Highly expensively, paying exactly $1,000 or 60,000 rubles entirely for exactly one highly dark night. Highly, simply, highly generously, let me highly completely turn, completely off the highly annoying sound. Julian stated completely with his highly soft, toxic voice. He confidently picked completely up the expensive phone. It violently vibrated entirely in his massive hand. a highly desperate, frantic buzzing. He absolutely did not highly smoothly swipe his strong finger entirely to highly actively answer. He absolutely did not highly meticulously check the highly urgent voicemail. He highly aggressively held the highly secure power button and the highly physical volume button completely, 100% simultaneously completely, until the bright screen completely, violently, went pitch black. "Perfectly there," he stated, highly carelessly throwing it completely onto the highly soft blanket. Completely, permanently vanished. Vanessa beautifully smiled highly toxically, completely satisfied. "Highly excellent! And exactly now, highly generously pour me absolutely another expensive glass. Exactly 5 agonizing miles, or 8 kilometers, completely away. A beautiful world was completely, violently, crumbling." Clara Vance absolutely was not highly pathetically calling entirely about green vegetables. She was highly loudly screaming entirely, while highly frantically rushing entirely at a highly terrifying, breakneck speed completely down the highly busy interstate. Exactly one highly frantic soft hand violently gripping the highly leather steering wheel completely until her delicate knuckles went completely, violently, white. The absolute other highly desperately clutching her expensive phone, highly frantically pressing redial entirely for the absolute 4th agonizing time. Highly urgently pick completely up. Highly urgently pick completely up. Highly urgently pick completely up. Be completely violently damned, Julian. She was violently sobbing. In the highly cramped back seat, the highly terrifying wheezing was incredibly frightening. It actively sounded exactly like a highly rusty old saw, violently cutting completely through highly wet, heavy wood. Timmy, their highly innocent, exactly 6-year-old biological son, was completely, violently, thrashing completely against the highly secure seatbelt. His highly innocent, beautiful face was highly rapidly acquiring a highly terrifying, ashen gray shade. "Mama," Timmy highly hoarsely wheezed. The highly terrifying sound was literally barely explicitly heard. "I absolutely cannot highly successfully breathe. I completely know, my beautiful baby. I completely know we are miraculously almost perfectly there. Daddy absolutely is not highly actively answering, but Mama is perfectly here," Clara loudly screamed, highly aggressively swerving completely around a highly slow-moving, massive truck. Absolutely everything had highly tragically happened so incredibly, highly fast. A highly severe, catastrophic allergic reaction completely to a highly negligently, incorrectly labeled cheap cookie, completely from a highly cheap bakery, entirely at the highly innocent school charity fair. The highly crucial epinephrine auto-injector had highly catastrophically jammed. Exactly one highly fatal pathetic defect entirely in a highly massive million. And completely by the absolute time they highly frantically got completely into the expensive car. The highly fragile throat, entirely of Timmy, was absolutely already completely, violently, closing, completely shut. Clara highly frantically pressed redial completely anew. The highly specific subscriber you are highly actively calling is currently completely turned off, or is highly currently completely outside the highly active network coverage area. The highly automatic, freezing, cold voice physically felt exactly like a highly brutal physical slap. Where exactly absolutely was he? Julian had highly explicitly told her that he was highly responsibly staying incredibly late, entirely at the highly busy office, entirely due completely to the highly massive bare corporate account. He absolutely should highly actively be entirely in the massive office. He absolutely should highly actively be perfectly at his massive desk. Why exactly was his expensive phone turned completely off? Clara violently burst completely into the highly chaotic emergency room, entirely of St. Jude's Hospital, completely with highly loud squealing brakes. She absolutely did not highly pathetically wait entirely for a highly polite nurse. She highly aggressively grabbed Timmy. He was exactly now completely dead weight. His highly innocent head violently fell completely back, and she violently ran. Highly urgently, help! Absolutely someone! Highly urgently, help my innocent son! The highly agonizing following hour was a highly blurry blur entirely of highly sterile white coats, highly loudly screaming voices, and the highly sharp, tearing sound entirely of highly medical Velcro. Clara safely stood perfectly in the highly dark corner entirely of the highly terrifying resuscitation room, highly tightly pressing her soft hands completely against her open mouth. Her expensive phone absolutely still highly tightly clutched entirely in her violently trembling soft hand. She had highly frantically texted Julian. Absolute emergency. St. Jude's Hospital. Timmy is highly actively dying. Highly urgently. Pick completely up. Absolutely nothing. The highly urgent message absolutely was not even highly successfully delivered. A highly respected doctor completely with incredibly kind, highly exhausted piercing eyes confidently approached her. Dr. Evans. He highly slowly pulled completely down his highly sterile medical mask. The massive room completely behind him highly suddenly became incredibly, highly quiet. The highly chaotic, terrifying beeping entirely of the highly advanced machines completely, violently stopped. Mrs. Vance, Dr. Evans whispered incredibly softly. Where exactly is he? Clara whispered incredibly softly. Is he completely perfectly fine? Dr. Evans highly gently placed a highly comforting, warm hand perfectly on her fragile shoulder. We highly desperately did absolutely everything that we could highly possibly actively do. The highly severe anaphylaxis completely, violently caused highly sudden cardiac arrest. His highly fragile airways were completely, violently blocked entirely for way too incredibly long. Clara violently shook her delicate head. No! No! He is exactly 6. He literally just highly happily, aggressively began entirely to actively play t-ball. I am incredibly, profoundly sorry, Dr. Evans stated incredibly quietly. Timmy is completely gone. Clara absolutely did not violently scream. Absolutely not completely yet. She highly simply intensely looked completely down directly at her expensive phone. At the pitch-black, dark screen. At the highly precise, exact time entirely of her absolute last, highly frantic call, completely to Julian. 8:42 p.m. The highly precise, exact moment, exactly when the massive heart entirely of Timmy completely, violently stopped. Julian had absolutely been completely unavailable. Julian turned off his phone to cheat, and it cost his son's life. What is the ultimate punishment for him? Drop your fierce thoughts below. Part 2. The Return of the Traitor. It was exactly 2 a.m. exactly when Julian Vance confidently drove his highly expensive BMW directly onto the highly expansive driveway, entirely of their highly beautiful colonial-style luxury mansion, entirely in highly exclusive Westchester, or Rubliovka. He profoundly felt incredibly relaxed. The highly massive tension entirely of the highly exhausting work week had completely, beautifully left his strong muscles. Vanessa had absolutely been completely, utterly exceptional, exactly this highly dark night. Confidently walking completely up the highly paved path, he highly casually checked his expensive phone. He highly smoothly turned exactly it completely on, highly anxiously expecting a highly annoying flurry entirely of highly nagging, pathetic messages. Instead, the expensive phone completely, violently choked. Exactly 27 highly frantic missed calls. Exactly 14 highly urgent messages. Absolutely not. Entirely, only completely from Clara, from his highly terrified mother-in-law, from the highly strict hospital. And exactly one single, highly secure message, completely from a highly secure number that he highly flawlessly recognized completely, with highly freezing, absolute horror. Arthur Sterling, the highly terrifying, powerful father entirely of Clara. Julian confidently stood perfectly on the highly cold porch, the highly expensive key highly dangerously hovering perfectly over the highly secure lock. The highly heavy silence entirely in the massive house was incredibly heavy. It absolutely was not the highly peaceful silence entirely of highly deep sleep. It was the highly terrifying silence entirely of a highly dark tomb. He incredibly slowly opened the heavy door. Absolutely all the highly bright lights were completely turned completely on in the highly comfortable armchair, entirely in the massive living room. Absolutely still, flawlessly wearing her highly elegant coat, sat peacefully. Clara. She intensely stared completely blankly directly at the highly unlit, cold fireplace. She visually looked exactly like a highly fragile, broken porcelain doll that had absolutely been highly carelessly dropped and highly incorrectly glued, completely back, completely together, by the large window, intensely peering completely out directly into the pitch-black darkness. Confidently stood a massive man, flawlessly wearing a highly bespoke, dark gray suit. He heavily leaned completely on a highly expensive walking cane, flawlessly made entirely of highly polished ebony wood. Arthur Sterling. Exactly this massive man was an absolute terrifying legend, entirely in the highly ruthless corporate world, but absolutely not exactly as a highly famous CEO, but exactly as an absolute, terrifying fixer. He was officially a highly ruthless forensic auditor who highly successfully, violently brought completely down highly corrupt senators and highly arrogant bank directors. He absolutely never, ever violently yelled. He absolutely never, ever highly maliciously threatened. He highly simply, highly meticulously found exactly one highly weak, pathetic thread entirely in the beautiful life, entirely of a massive man, and highly relentlessly pulled completely until the pathetic man completely, violently unraveled. "Clara?" Julian asked, his deep voice violently trembling incredibly slightly. I vividly saw the highly frantic calls. My expensive phone completely, violently died. The highly essential charger was completely forgotten entirely in the massive office. Clara absolutely did not violently blink. She absolutely did not actively look directly at him. Arthur incredibly slowly, smoothly turned completely around. His handsome face was completely, utterly unreadable. A highly terrifying mask, flawlessly carved completely from highly old, solid granite. "Your expensive phone completely, violently died, Julian." "Yes," Julian highly maliciously lied. The highly toxic fabrication confidentially came incredibly easily. I was highly responsibly entirely in the massive office. The highly massive bare corporate case. I completely, catastrophically lost all highly strict track entirely of highly precious time. And the highly pathetic battery completely violently discharged. What exactly is highly actively happening? Is Timmy highly severely sick? Arthur confidently stepped completely forward. The highly expensive cane, highly rhythmically, loudly tapping completely on the highly polished parquet floor. Tap, tap, tap. Timmy absolutely is not highly severely sick, Julian. Timmy is completely, permanently dead. The massive world completely, violently, fell completely out. Completely from directly under the weak feet entirely of Julian. What? He completely, permanently died exactly 4 agonizing hours completely ago. Arthur stated completely, with a deep voice, completely, utterly, devoid, entirely of absolutely any pathetic emotion, which highly terrifyingly actively made exactly it, significantly, infinitely, more highly frightening. A highly severe allergic reaction. Clara highly frantically called you. Clara highly frantically called. She highly frantically called you exactly while he highly desperately gasped entirely for heavy air. She highly frantically called you exactly while the highly sterile doctors highly frantically cut his highly small clothes completely off him. She highly frantically called you exactly when they highly officially pronounced the highly exact time entirely of his highly tragic death. No! Julian heavily fell directly onto his weak knees. A highly pathetic, toxic spectacle entirely of highly fake grief. Exactly half completely real. Exactly half highly absolute panic. No! Oh my absolute God, no! My innocent boy! He highly desperately reached completely out directly toward Clara. Do absolutely not highly actively touch me, Clara stated. Her beautiful voice was incredibly hoarse. She finally, incredibly slowly, turned her delicate head entirely to intensely look completely directly entirely at him. Her piercing eyes were completely, utterly dry. She had completely, violently wept absolutely all her hot tears entirely in the highly sterile hospital. Exactly now perfectly. There was absolutely only a highly freezing, completely empty massive void. Where exactly absolutely were you? She asked. I highly explicitly told you, Julian highly pathetically pleaded. Hot tears, highly violently streaming completely down his pale face. I was highly responsibly entirely in the massive office. I absolutely did not completely know. If I absolutely only completely knew. In the massive office, Arthur highly coldly repeated. He smoothly pulled a highly expensive, antique silver pocket watch completely from his highly bespoke vest. Highly meticulously checked exactly it. And highly loudly snapped it completely shut. Were you highly responsibly entirely in the highly exclusive Sterling Cooper massive branch, entirely and highly busy downtown? Yes! I was completely, utterly alone. I highly responsibly closed absolutely everything completely down. Arthur intensely stared directly at him. He absolutely did not explicitly say, I profoundly know that you are highly maliciously lying. He absolutely did not violently scream, highly pathetic liar. He highly simply intensely stared, highly analytically analyzing Julian. Exactly like a highly pathetic bug, perfectly under a highly advanced microscope. Arthur profoundly knew the highly strict security protocols entirely, of exactly that highly massive building significantly better than absolutely anyone completely else. He highly legally owned the highly elite security firm that highly securely guarded exactly it. Tomorrow, highly early morning, we highly desperately need entirely to confidently go directly to the highly somber funeral home, Arthur stated. Completely, utterly ignoring the highly pathetic, dramatic outburst entirely of Julian. Confidently go completely upstairs, highly rapidly take a highly hot shower. You highly aggressively smell. Arthur highly noticeably sniffed, his highly sharp nostrils violently flaring incredibly slightly, of highly expensive hibiscus and highly flat vintage champagne. Absolutely not. The highly specific smell entirely of a highly exhausting late night, entirely in a highly sterile office. Julian completely, violently, froze. Vanessa highly exclusively used a highly expensive designer perfume, highly explicitly named Hibiscus Night. I highly professionally drank completely, with a highly important client entirely, to highly proudly celebrate the highly successful completion entirely of the highly complex report. Julian highly pathetically muttered, his massive heart violently pounding completely against his fragile ribs, exactly like a highly terrified bird, entirely in a highly tight cage. Arthur confidently walked completely past him, completely stopping perfectly right, perfectly next, completely to his highly terrified ear. My highly innocent grandson is completely, permanently dead, Julian. If I highly shockingly discover that you absolutely were, absolutely anywhere, completely else, completely, except exactly the highly specific place, exactly where you highly arrogantly claim you absolutely were, absolutely God himself, absolutely will not be highly successfully capable entirely of highly miraculously helping you, because he absolutely will not highly successfully get directly to you completely before I do. Arthur confidentially left completely through the highly heavy front door, highly quietly, completely closing exactly it. Julian safely remained perfectly on his weak knees, violently trembling. He intensely looked directly at Clara, but she had absolutely already confidently stood completely up and was confidently walking completely up the highly steep stairs, exactly like a highly silent ghost. Clara, please, he whispered incredibly softly. Peacefully sleep entirely in the highly distant guest bedroom, she stated. Absolutely not, actively looking completely back. I absolutely cannot highly possibly successfully bear entirely to intensely look directly at you, while Julian peacefully sat entirely in the highly empty, dark living room. He highly frantically pulled completely out his expensive phone. He highly hastily, completely, violently deleted the highly damning call log. He completely, violently deleted the highly toxic message completely from Vanessa. Did you highly safely successfully get completely home, highly passionate lover? 3, 2, 1. Completely deleted. He highly arrogantly, genuinely thought he was completely safe. He highly toxically thought he had highly successfully covered his highly toxic tracks. But he completely, catastrophically, forgot exactly one highly massive thing. Arthur Sterling absolutely did not highly desperately need a highly expensive phone entirely to profoundly know the absolute truth. Arthur Sterling was exactly the highly specific kind entirely of massive man who could highly easily completely read the highly complex history entirely of a massive room. Highly simply, completely, by highly, peacefully. Being entirely in exactly it. And exactly today, he had highly clearly smelled the highly expensive perfume entirely of absolutely another beautiful woman, perfectly on his highly arrogant son-in-law. Entirely, while his highly devastated daughter highly aggressively smelled entirely of highly sterile hospital antiseptic. The highly somber funeral was highly officially scheduled entirely in exactly 3 agonizing days, and exactly these 3 agonizing days would absolutely be the absolute longest, highly agonizing days entirely in the entire massive life entirely of Julian. But the highly absolute, true, massive horror absolutely had not absolutely even highly actively begun. Arthur knows Julian is lying about his whereabouts. Do you think he will expose him at the funeral or wait for a bigger moment? Tell us below. Part 3. The funeral and the smoking gun. The highly tragic day entirely of the highly somber funeral, entirely of little Timmy Vance, was highly depressingly painted, entirely in highly somber slate gray tones. A highly relentless, freezing drizzle violently fell completely upon the highly exclusive, elite cemetery, entirely in highly expensive Westchester, or Rubliovka, highly maliciously transforming the highly manicured, expensive lawn completely into a highly slippery, muddy, dark carpet. Julian confidently stood perfectly. Right, perfectly, next completely to Clara, completely under a highly massive, black designer umbrella. He was flawlessly dressed entirely in his absolute best, highly bespoke suit. A highly expensive, tailored suit, completely from Tom Ford, that highly easily cost exactly $4,000, or 400,000 rubles. He flawlessly wore highly dark, expensive designer sunglasses, absolutely not entirely to highly successfully block the highly bright sun, but entirely to highly maliciously hide the highly terrifying fact that his piercing eyes absolutely were not highly sufficiently red, entirely from highly genuine crying. Exactly. This highly dark morning he had highly meticulously rehearsed his highly tragic facial expression perfectly in front, entirely of the massive mirror, highly deeply furrowed eyebrows, highly tightly clenched sharp jaw, the highly perfect look entirely of a highly strong man, highly bravely holding completely back a highly massive ocean entirely of pure grief. People highly sympathetically whispered exactly as they highly respectfully passed completely by. Highly poor, tragic Julian. He visually looks completely, utterly broken. He brutally worked incredibly late entirely to highly responsibly provide entirely for them. And exactly now, exactly this, Julian highly toxically absorbed the highly pure sympathy, exactly like a highly potent, toxic drug. It was highly successfully working. The highly fake, toxic narrative flawlessly held. He was officially the highly hard-working, devoted father who was highly tragically absent. Absolutely not the highly unfaithful, toxic husband who highly maliciously ignored the highly frantic call. Clara, however, was completely motionless, exactly like a highly fragile, cold statue. She hadn't actively spoken a single heavy word completely to him, completely since exactly that highly dark night. She confidently returned completely from the highly sterile hospital. She peacefully stood perfectly by the highly small, white wooden casket, highly gently placing her fragile hand perfectly on the highly cold wood. She visually looked incredibly fragile. Her pale skin was highly almost translucent completely against the highly dark, austere black dress. Arthur Sterling confidently stood exactly 3 short meters completely behind. He absolutely was not completely under a highly protective umbrella. He highly stubbornly permitted the freezing rain entirely to violently beat completely against his handsome face, the highly cold water violently dripping completely from the highly wide brim entirely of his expensive hat. He absolutely did not intensely look directly at the small casket. He was highly meticulously scanning the highly secure perimeter. Arthur had highly aggressively spent exactly 40 agonizing years, completely, violently, annihilating highly fraudulent, massive companies and highly corrupt, arrogant CEOs. He profoundly knew that highly arrogant criminals, highly blindly driven, completely by highly toxic narcissism, highly frequently, confidentially, return directly to the highly specific scene entirely of the highly terrible crime, or, entirely in exactly this highly specific case, directly to the highly tragic scene entirely of the highly catastrophic consequences. His piercing eyes completely, violently narrowed. On the absolute other, highly distant side entirely of the highly exclusive cemetery, peacefully parked perfectly on the highly quiet driveway, completely behind a highly thick row entirely of highly old oak trees, safely stood a highly flashy, bright red Mercedes C-Class. The highly expensive windows were highly darkly tinted, but the highly sleek glass completely on the highly specific side. Entirely of the highly observant driver was incredibly slightly cracked open, exactly 2 short centimeters. From perfectly inside, exactly it. A highly thin, highly toxic stream, entirely of cigarette smoke, highly lazily drifted completely out. Arthur highly firmly slapped the broad shoulder entirely of the massive man, confidently standing perfectly. Right perfectly. Next completely. To him. Marcus, or Kirill, his highly terrifying head of security and highly elite private investigator. Marcus was officially a highly lethal former intelligence operative, a massive man who highly comfortably existed entirely in the highly dark shadows. The highly flashy red Mercedes, Arthur muttered incredibly quietly. His deep voice literally barely explicitly heard completely through the highly loud noise entirely of the freezing rain. Highly rapidly, right, completely down. The highly specific license plates. Highly urgently. Find completely. Exactly who is highly maliciously observing the highly solemn burial entirely of my highly innocent grandson. Absolutely already entirely in highly active process, sir, Marcus highly efficiently replied, highly casually glancing directly at his highly advanced tablet. Highly officially registered directly to Vanessa Romanova, exactly 28 young years old, the highly elite director of marketing entirely in highly prominent Horizon Media. Arthur highly securely saved. Exactly that highly specific name completely in his brilliant mind. Exactly, like a highly lethal, loaded bullet. Vanessa Romanova. When the highly respected priest finally highly solemnly concluded the absolute last, highly emotional prayer, earth directly to highly dark earth, ashes directly to highly cold ashes, Julian confidently stepped completely forward entirely to highly dramatically place exactly 1 single, highly beautiful white rose perfectly on the small casket. He loudly sobbed. A highly loud, completely heartbreaking sound that highly successfully actively made the highly sympathetic attendees highly respectfully bow their highly somber heads entirely in highly deep respect. But Arthur vividly saw exactly what the completely others absolutely did not vividly see. When Julian highly dramatically wiped his piercing eyes, His massive hand highly smoothly slid directly to his highly expensive pocket. He highly rapidly checked his expensive phone, a highly quick, highly tactile toxic reassurance. He was incredibly nervous after the highly emotional service. The highly somber wake was highly beautifully held, entirely in the highly massive sterling luxury residence. The massive house was completely filled with highly delicious casseroles, highly expensive flowers, and highly hushed, polite conversations. Julian highly flawlessly played the highly perfect role entirely of the highly gracious host, highly politely accepting highly sincere condolences, completely with a highly tragic, brave nod. If I had bowed absolutely only confidentially left highly exhausting work exactly 1 agonizing hour significantly earlier, Julian highly pathetically stated completely to a highly sympathetic group entirely of the highly caring aunts, entirely of Clara. His deep voice highly dramatically breaking. If I absolutely was not so incredibly, highly focused, completely on exactly that highly massive merger, you absolutely could not highly possibly have completely known, Julian. Highly lovingly comforted Aunt Martha, highly gently patting his strong arm. You were highly responsibly providing entirely for your beautiful family. From the highly dark corner entirely of the massive room, Arthur highly intensely watched. He fiercely held a highly expensive glass, entirely of vintage whiskey, entirely, to which he absolutely had not highly actively touched. He highly patiently waited completely until the highly massive crowd highly significantly thinned completely out. Then he confidently entered the highly private home office entirely of Julian. He absolutely did not highly carelessly turn completely on the bright lights. He confidently walked directly to the massive desk. He absolutely did not highly illegally hack the highly secure computer. Exactly that was way too incredibly dirty. Instead, he highly meticulously looked entirely at the highly physical, undeniable evidence. On the highly polished desk safely lay a highly small, crumpled parking ticket. Julian was incredibly, completely sloppy. Highly toxic grief, or highly fake, pathetic performances entirely of exactly it. Highly successfully actively made highly arrogant people incredibly careless. Arthur highly carefully took the highly small ticket. It absolutely was not completely from the highly secure corporate garage, entirely of highly elite Sterling Cooper. The highly exclusive corporate garage highly strictly used a highly secure keycard system that absolutely did not highly pointlessly issue highly cheap paper receipts entirely for highly elite employees. It was officially a highly cheap ticket, flawlessly made entirely of highly cheap thermal paper. Highly exclusive valet service. Arthur squeezed the highly expensive glass so incredibly, violently hard that the delicate knuckles entirely of his strong fingers went completely, violently white. The highly strict timeline. Check-in at exactly 6:15 p.m. Timmy highly tragically went completely into highly severe anaphylactic shock at exactly 8:30 p.m. Julian absolutely was not entirely in the highly sterile office. He was entirely in the highly luxurious hotel. Arthur highly smoothly shoved the highly damning ticket completely into his deep pocket. He confidently walked completely out, entirely of the highly dark office, and highly successfully found Clara, peacefully sitting entirely in the highly empty kitchen. Intensely staring completely blankly, directly at a highly untouched plate, entirely of cold food. He is highly maliciously lying. Absolutely, isn't he? Clara incredibly quietly asked. She absolutely did not slowly look completely up. Arthur smoothly pulled completely out a highly comfortable chair and sat heavily down directly opposite completely from her. Yes, he highly toxically explicitly told us that he was highly responsibly entirely in the massive office. I completely know, Clara stated, her beautiful voice violently trembling completely with a highly pure rage that she was way too incredibly completely exhausted entirely to highly physically explicitly express. His highly expensive clothes. He highly aggressively smelled entirely of her. I absolutely do not completely know exactly who she truly is, Dad. But I profoundly know that he absolutely was not highly responsibly working. Arthur confidently reached completely across the massive table and highly gently took the soft hand entirely of his highly devastated daughter. I highly successfully found entirely in his highly private office a highly damning parking ticket completely from the highly exclusive Ritz-Carlton entirely for exactly that highly dark night. The delicate head entirely of Clara, completely, violently, snapped completely up. The highly profound grief entirely in her piercing eyes completely, violently disappeared, flawlessly replaced completely by a highly sharp, incredibly freezing cold, absolute hatred. He was entirely in a highly luxurious hotel exactly while Timmy was highly agonizingly dying. Yes, I highly fiercely want to completely violently kill him, she whispered incredibly softly. I highly fiercely want to highly loudly scream exactly this, completely, to absolutely everyone, entirely in the highly adjacent room. I highly fiercely want to completely, violently destroy him. Roy. No, Arthur stated incredibly firmly. You will absolutely do absolutely nothing entirely of the highly pathetic sort. Absolutely not completely yet. Why exactly did he highly callously, generously permit our highly innocent son entirely to completely die? Because, Arthur stated, his deep voice completely, violently dropping directly to a highly terrifyingly low register. If you highly loudly scream right exactly now, he will highly successfully get a highly standard divorce. He will highly successfully get exactly 1/2 entirely of the highly massive assets. He will highly happily confidently move completely on. He will highly pathetically play the highly tragic role entirely of the highly innocent victim. He will highly maliciously invent a highly toxic story entirely about exactly how highly massive grief completely, violently drove you completely insane. Arthur confidently stood completely up, highly imposingly towering completely over the massive table. Exactly, like a highly dark, terrifying judgment. We absolutely do not entirely just highly fiercely want him entirely to confidently leave, Clara. We highly fiercely want him entirely to absolutely be completely, violently erased. We highly fiercely want to completely violently take his highly pristine reputation, his highly massive money, his highly bright future, and his highly absolute freedom. We will highly generously permit him entirely to highly arrogantly, genuinely believe that he highly successfully got completely away, completely with exactly it. We will highly generously permit him entirely to highly comfortably settle completely down. And exactly then, exactly when he is perfectly at the highly absolute peak, we will completely, violently cut the highly fragile thread. Clara highly aggressively wiped a hot tear completely from her pale cheek. She took a massive, incredibly deep breath. What exactly do I highly desperately need entirely to actively do? You highly flawlessly play the highly tragic, grieving widow, Arthur highly strictly instructed. You highly generously permit him entirely to highly pathetically comfort you. You highly generously permit him entirely to highly arrogantly, genuinely believe that he is completely, 100% safe. Highly confidently leave the absolute rest completely, 100% to me. Arthur and Clara are planning the ultimate revenge against Julian. What do you think is the best way to destroy him? Let us know below. Part 4. The Boardroom Execution. Exactly 2 agonizing weeks seamlessly passed. The highly sharp edge entirely of the highly profound grief aggressively began entirely to incredibly slowly. Dull completely into a highly heavy, constantly aching toxic throb, entirely for Clara, but entirely for Julian. His beautiful life was highly rapidly returning completely. Back directly to highly normal completely, with a highly terrifying, disgusting speed. He highly arrogantly, genuinely believed that the highly terrifying storm had completely passed. Clara was incredibly quiet, absolutely even highly submissive. Arthur had completely stopped highly actively visiting the massive house absolutely every single massive day. Julian highly toxically convinced completely himself that his highly toxic lie entirely about the massive office had highly flawlessly worked. After absolutely all, who exactly would highly possibly fiercely question a highly tragically grieving true father? On a highly bright Tuesday, highly early morning, Julian confidently drove directly to his highly massive office entirely in highly elite Sterling Cooper Financial. He was highly officially scheduled entirely to absolutely be highly proudly promoted directly to highly elite senior partner. A highly coveted, massive position entirely, to which highly generously attached a highly massive salary increase entirely of exactly $5 million, or 50 million rubles, and a highly coveted, exclusive seat perfectly on the highly elite board of directors. He highly arrogantly, genuinely believed that he had highly bravely earned exactly it. The highly tragic tragedy completely with Timmy had. Entirely in highly absolute fact. Highly miraculously generated, highly massive sympathy entirely among the highly elite senior partners. They intensely looked directly at him completely, with a significantly softer, highly sympathetic piercing gaze. He highly securely closed the heavy door entirely of his highly exclusive corner office, and highly rapidly dialed Vanessa. "I highly desperately missed you," he whispered incredibly softly. "I was highly respectfully entirely at the highly somber funeral," Vanessa stated completely with a highly pouting, toxic voice. "I vividly saw you completely with her. You fiercely held her soft hand. I absolutely had to, Van. It is completely 100% entirely for highly fake show. She is completely crushed. As incredibly soon, exactly as the highly massive dust completely settles, I will highly aggressively demand a highly official legal separation. I highly desperately need entirely to highly successfully get exactly this highly massive promotion absolutely first. Arthur is officially the highly absolute chairman entirely of the highly elite board, but he is exactly half completely retired. If I highly successfully get the highly coveted position entirely of senior partner, I will highly proudly possess my absolute own highly massive leverage. I highly absolutely hate highly impatiently waiting," Vanessa heavily sighed. "Highly romantically meet me entirely in the highly usual, exclusive place entirely for highly delicious lunch. Absolutely cannot actively do exactly today. Way too incredibly risky, but incredibly soon." Julian completely hung up. profoundly feeling completely, 100% completely in absolute control, on the absolute other, highly distant side entirely of the massive city, in a highly massive building that visually looked exactly like a highly impenetrable fortress, entirely of freezing glass and solid steel. Arthur Sterling peacefully sat entirely in a highly dark room, heavily surrounded completely by highly advanced monitors. It was officially the highly secure headquarters, entirely of his highly elite, private consulting firm. "Highly officially report," Arthur stated. Marcus confidently stepped completely forward, highly flawlessly projecting a highly clear image completely onto the highly massive main screen. It was officially a highly strict, detailed timeline. "We officially possess absolutely everything, sir." I highly professionally spoke completely with the highly responsible shift manager, entirely in the highly exclusive Ritz-Carlton. A highly small, highly generous donation directly to their highly massive Security Systems Upgrade Fund, highly flawlessly, did the highly miraculous trick. We officially possess the highly authentic CCTV footage directly on the bright screen. A highly grainy, black and white, highly secure video violently played. Highly official timestamp, 8:40 p.m., exactly 2 agonizing minutes completely before the highly tragic death entirely of Timmy. The highly secure video highly clearly showed the highly quiet corridor entirely of the exactly 4th massive floor. A highly polite waiter was highly professionally delivering a highly expensive tray, completely with vintage champagne and highly expensive oysters, directly to highly exclusive Suite 402. The heavy door smoothly opened. Perfectly. There confidently stood Julian Vance, flawlessly wearing a highly luxurious hotel bathrobe, loudly laughing. He highly happily took the highly expensive tray. Directly behind him, highly casually passed Vanessa Romanova, flawlessly wearing highly expensive designer lingerie. We highly successfully, also highly expertly extracted the highly complex data completely from the highly advanced cellular towers, Marcus aggressively continued. At exactly 8:42 p.m., exactly when Clara highly frantically called him entirely for the absolute 3rd agonizing time, his expensive phone highly successfully pinged completely to the highly specific tower absolute nearest, directly to the highly exclusive hotel. Then, it was completely, violently, disconnected, highly, manually, completely, turned, completely, off. Arthur intensely stared directly at the bright screen. He completely turned exactly it, completely off. He absolutely didn't entirely just, highly accidentally, miss the highly frantic call. He highly clearly vividly saw the expensive phone violently ringing, and he completely, violently, turned exactly it, completely off. "Absolutely correct," Marcus stated. "We absolutely also dug incredibly deeply completely into his highly complex finances. He has absolutely been highly illegally siphoning massive money completely from the highly secure joint account that he highly legally shares completely with Clara, entirely for highly expensive gifts, entirely for Miss Romanova. Highly expensive Cartier bracelets, highly expensive hotel suites, the highly expensive lease entirely for her bright red Mercedes. Absolutely everything is perfectly right, perfectly here." But Marcus violently paused. "There is absolutely something significantly more." Highly aggressively continue. "Julian has absolutely been highly illegally falsifying the highly complex reporting entirely on the highly massive Bear corporate account. He has absolutely been highly illegally inflating the highly projected, massive profitability entirely to highly illegally. Increase his highly massive quarterly bonuses. It is incredibly subtle, but it is completely, utterly illegal fraud. If exactly this highly shockingly comes completely out, he absolutely won't entirely just completely lose his highly elite job. He will confidently go directly to highly strict federal prison. Arthur heavily leaned completely back entirely in his expensive leather chair. A highly cruel, completely satisfied, toxic smile beautifully touched his handsome lips. He highly arrogantly, genuinely thinks that highly anticipated Friday, he will highly proudly get a highly massive promotion, Arthur stated. Will he highly successfully get exactly it? Marcus asked. Oh, yes, Arthur stated. We will highly generously permit him entirely to highly arrogantly, genuinely believe that he has highly successfully conquered the entire massive world. I highly fiercely want him entirely to confidently stand perfectly on the highly imposing podium. I highly fiercely want him entirely to profoundly taste the highly sweet, massive victory. And exactly then, I highly fiercely want to highly intently watch exactly how he completely, violently chokes completely on exactly it. Arthur confidently took his expensive phone and highly rapidly dialed the highly prominent current CEO entirely of Sterling Cooper, a massive man explicitly named Edward or Artur. Edward. It is officially Arthur. Arthur! Incredibly glad entirely to clearly hear exactly how the beautiful family is highly bravely holding completely up. We are highly bravely managing, Arthur stated incredibly smoothly. Intensely, listen, entirely regarding the highly anticipated decision entirely about the highly coveted senior partner position exactly on highly anticipated Friday. I was highly deeply thinking. Julian, he highly desperately needs a highly massive victory. He highly desperately needs absolutely something completely upon which entirely to highly intensely focus completely after the highly tragic loss entirely of his innocent son. I highly genuinely think we absolutely should highly proudly announce exactly it entirely at the highly massive quarterly board meeting. Highly aggressively make a highly grand spectacle completely out, entirely, of exactly it. Highly officially invite the highly aggressive press. Highly proudly broadcast exactly it directly to the highly massive regional offices. Let's highly honorably honor his highly absolute resilience. An absolutely wonderful, brilliant idea, Arthur, Edward highly enthusiastically agreed. We will highly proudly organize a highly massive grand celebration. Completely perfect, Arthur stated. I will absolutely be perfectly there, highly personally, entirely to highly proudly present him. He completely hung up. The highly massive trap absolutely was not entirely just completely set. The highly delicious bait was highly officially served, completely with highly lethal poison. Part 5. The Annihilation. Highly anticipated Friday confidently arrived completely with a highly bright, highly maliciously mocking bright sun. Inside the highly imposing headquarters entirely of Sterling Cooper. Perfectly, there was a highly loud electric hum. The highly massive quarterly board meeting absolutely usually was a highly boring, completely routine event. But exactly today, highly exciting rumors, highly rapidly circulated, that Julian Vance was highly actively about to absolutely be highly proudly crowned, exactly as the highly anticipated brand new prince entirely of the highly elite firm. Julian flawlessly dressed completely with highly meticulous care. He flawlessly wore a highly bespoke dark blue suit, a highly impeccably crisp white shirt, and a highly expensive tie that little Timmy had highly proudly gifted him entirely on Father's Day, exactly last beautiful year. He absolutely did not highly proudly wear. Exactly it completely out, entirely of highly pure sentimentality, but entirely because he profoundly knew that it would highly successfully play incredibly well perfectly on the highly elite board. The highly tragic, grieving father, highly bravely continuing, entirely to actively move, completely, forward. He confidently arrived entirely in the highly massive boardroom perfectly on the highly exclusive top floor. The massive room was completely enormous, completely with highly breathtaking floor-to-ceiling windows, perfectly overlooking the highly beautiful panorama, entirely of massive Manhattan. Exactly 50 highly powerful people were highly officially present. The highly elite board of directors, highly key massive stakeholders, and highly elite top management. A highly professional video crew was highly actively preparing entirely to highly proudly live stream the highly exclusive event directly to exactly 3,000 highly dedicated employees, entirely of the massive company, completely, all completely over the entire massive world. Julian confidently took his highly coveted seat incredibly close, completely to the absolute head entirely of the massive table. He profoundly felt a highly slight vibration entirely in his deep pocket, a highly secure message completely from Vanessa. Highly massive, luck, my beautiful baby. We will highly passionately celebrate exactly tonight. 3, 2, 1. He highly discreetly beautifully smiled and highly rapidly texted completely back. Highly expensive champagne is completely on ice. Edward, the highly prominent CEO, confidently stood perfectly behind the highly imposing podium. Highly esteemed ladies and highly powerful gentlemen, thank you so incredibly much, entirely, for confidently coming. It has absolutely been a highly complex, difficult quarter, but absolutely also a highly massive quarter entirely of highly pure triumph. Exactly today, we highly fiercely want to highly honorably honor a massive man who has highly bravely demonstrated highly incredible, absolute fortitude. Edward highly proudly pointed directly at Julian. Julian, please, highly politely confidently approach perfectly right perfectly here. Julian confidently stood completely up. Highly loud, thunderous applause completely, violently erupted. He confidently walked completely forward, highly politely shaking strong hands, highly flawlessly, faking highly pure humility. Julian has highly brilliantly led the highly massive Bear corporate account directly to highly absolute record levels, Edward stated, and entirely despite a highly catastrophic personal tragedy that would completely, violently break a significantly less highly strong man. He has safely remained completely dedicated, completely, to exactly this highly elite firm. For me, it is a highly massive honor entirely to highly proudly announce his highly massive promotion directly to highly elite senior partner. The highly thunderous applause violently became significantly louder. Julian confidently approached the highly active microphone. Thank you so incredibly much, he stated completely with a deep voice, completely full, entirely of highly fake emotion. Exactly this is completely, entirely for my highly innocent son, Timmy. I profoundly know that he is highly, proudly, intensely looking completely down, perfectly on me, completely, from completely high up. From the absolute far back entirely of the highly massive room, loudly resonated the highly sharp tapping entirely of a highly expensive cane, completely against the hard floor. The highly sharp sound, completely, violently, cut completely through the highly loud applause exactly like a highly lethal knife. The massive room completely, violently fell entirely into highly dead silence. Arthur Sterling confidently stepped completely out, entirely of the highly dark shadows, entirely in the highly quiet back corner. He incredibly slowly, confidently walked completely forward. "Arthur," Edward stated, beautifully smiling, "I absolutely did not completely know that you would highly actively be highly proudly speaking. I officially possess absolutely something highly massive, entirely to highly actively ADD," Arthur stated. His deep voice was incredibly calm. But entirely and exactly and perfectly, there was a highly terrifying weight, completely from which the heavy air, entirely in the massive room, physically felt incredibly heavy. Julian profoundly felt exactly how a highly cold drop, entirely of cold sweat, violently rolled completely down his fragile spine. He absolutely had not highly actively expected Arthur entirely to absolutely be perfectly here. Arthur confidently approached the highly imposing podium. He absolutely did not actively look directly at the highly elite audience. He intensely looked completely straight, directly at Julian. "You highly proudly say that little Timmy is highly proudly intensely looking completely down, perfectly on you, Julian?" "Yes, Arthur," Julian stated, highly desperately squeezing completely out a highly fake, pathetic smile. "I highly intensely wonder exactly what he highly clearly vividly sees," Arthur highly thoughtfully explicitly said. He highly smoothly pulled completely out, completely from his deep pocket, a highly secure USB flash drive, and highly seamlessly inserted exactly it directly into the highly advanced presentation laptop, highly securely connected directly to the highly massive screen, completely behind them. "We were highly officially planning entirely to highly meticulously review the highly impressive growth charts entirely on the highly massive bear account," Arthur explicitly told the highly silent hall, "but entirely in the highly pure spirit entirely of highly absolute transparency, the highly absolute main core value entirely of exactly this massive company. I highly genuinely think we absolutely should highly meticulously review the highly absolute, true, massive price entirely of the highly dedicated loyalty entirely of Julian." The highly massive screen violently blinked. The highly prestigious corporate logo completely permanently disappeared. In its highly prominent place, confidentially, appeared a highly clear, scanned document, a highly official bank statement. "Exactly this," Arthur stated, highly aggressively pointing completely with his expensive cane, "is officially the highly secure corporate expense account, highly officially assigned completely to Julian. Highly meticulously. Notice the highly specific entries. The Ritz-Carlton, Cartier, Victoria's Secret. Unless the highly elite client entirely of the highly massive bear account has highly surprisingly aggressively begun entirely to flawlessly wear highly expensive lace lingerie, I highly accurately assume that exactly this is highly illegal misappropriation entirely of highly secure corporate funds." A highly loud murmur violently rolled completely across the massive hall. The handsome face entirely of Julian, completely, violently, paled. Arthur, perfectly there, absolutely must be a highly pathetic mistake. We can highly amicably discuss exactly this highly privately. Safely sit completely down, Arthur violently barked. The highly terrifying command was so incredibly, highly dominant that Julian entirely and highly absolute fact confidently took exactly one massive step completely back. But massive money is absolutely just highly pathetic massive money, Arthur aggressively continued. Let's highly seriously talk entirely about highly precious time, about the highly dark night exactly when my highly innocent grandson completely, permanently died. The highly massive screen completely, violently changed. It was officially the highly secure video recording completely from the highly quiet corridor entirely in the Ritz-Carlton. The highly official timestamp was incredibly huge and highly clearly read, 8:40 p.m. The absolute entire highly elite boardroom entirely in highly stunned, dead silence, highly intensely watched exactly as Julian, flawlessly wearing a highly luxurious hotel bathrobe, highly passionately kisses Vanessa Romanova perfectly in the highly open doorway. In exactly this highly exact same specific moment, Arthur highly clinically commented, his deep voice completely, violently transforming completely into freezing ice. My highly devoted daughter was highly frantically calling you. Timmy was highly agonizingly suffocating entirely in the highly cramped back seat entirely of the expensive sedan. His highly fragile throat was completely violently closing completely shut. He was highly desperately calling entirely for his highly devoted father. Arthur highly aggressively clicked the highly advanced remote. The highly damning image entirely of the highly detailed call records confidently appeared. 8:42 p.m. Highly secure power completely disconnected. You absolutely did not highly accidentally miss the highly frantic call, Julian. You completely, violently, turned completely off the highly annoying sound. You highly arrogantly chose your highly glamorous mistress completely over your highly agonizingly dying, innocent son. In the massive room perfectly, there was highly dead, deafening silence. You could highly clearly hear a highly tiny, pathetic pin violently drop. Julian highly frantically looked completely around. Highly cold panic violently rising directly to his dry throat. The highly elite members entirely of the massive board of directors intensely stared directly at him completely, with highly pure, unadulterated disgust. Edward visually looked exactly as if he were highly actively about to completely, violently vomit. Exactly this is a highly malicious lie, Julian violently screamed exactly as absolute desperation. Highly, completely took completely over. Exactly this highly damning video is completely maliciously forged. Exactly this is a highly toxic setup. Is exactly that highly officially so? Arthur softly asked. Then perhaps we absolutely should highly meticulously discuss the highly massive bare corporate account, the highly massive screen, completely, violently, changed completely. Exactly this highly specific time, it was officially a highly complex, detailed spreadsheet, completely with highly bright red highlights. You highly catastrophically committed highly illegal securities fraud, Julian. You highly illegally inflated the highly massive assets entirely of the highly massive bear account, completely by exactly 40%. Entirely. To highly illegally activate the highly strict conditions, entirely for highly successfully getting the highly massive bonus. I have absolutely already highly securely sent exactly this highly damning file directly to the highly strict FBI and the highly ruthless district attorney. Arthur smoothly leaned incredibly close directly to the active microphone. You absolutely are not highly proudly getting highly successfully promoted, Julian. You are completely, violently fired, and the highly elite police are highly impatiently waiting perfectly in the highly massive lobby. Julian violently backed completely away, his massive hands violently shaking. You absolutely cannot, highly possibly actively do exactly this. I highly miraculously built exactly this highly massive division. You highly miraculously built a highly pathetic house entirely of highly fragile cards, Arthur stated. And I simply highly effortlessly blew exactly it completely down into the highly quiet back part. Entirely of the massive room confidently entered exactly 2 highly imposing police officers, flawlessly wearing highly official uniforms. Julian highly frantically searched entirely for a highly viable exit, but perfectly there, absolutely, was none. The highly secure live broadcast was absolutely still, highly actively running. Exactly 3,000 highly dedicated employees, entirely in absolute real time, were highly intensely watching exactly how he completely, violently collapsed, while the highly imposing police officers highly roughly handcuffed the weak hands entirely of Julian, completely behind his fragile back. Arthur smoothly leaned incredibly close entirely, so exactly, that absolutely only Julian could highly clearly hear. Exactly. This is absolutely only the highly absolute beginning, Julian. You highly ruthlessly took the highly bright future entirely of my highly innocent grandson. I am completely, violently taking your highly toxic past, your highly pathetic present, and your highly pathetic future. Highly happily. Enjoy highly strict federal prison. I highly clearly heard the highly cheap food perfectly. There is significantly worse than entirely in the Ritz. Julian was highly roughly, humiliatingly dragged completely out, entirely of the highly elite boardroom entirely, while he loudly screamed that he was completely innocent. That exactly this was a highly pathetic mistake. Arthur confidently stood perfectly behind the highly imposing podium, highly meticulously adjusted his highly expensive designer cufflinks, and intensely looked directly at the highly stunned, elite members entirely of the massive board. And exactly now, Arthur stated incredibly calmly, does absolutely anyone completely else officially possess absolutely any highly hidden toxic liabilities entirely about which I absolutely should highly actively be completely aware? Julian was exposed on a live broadcast to 3,000 people. Was this the most savage revenge ever, or did Arthur go too far? Drop your fierce thoughts below. Part 6. The Purge of the Parasites. The highly catastrophic fall entirely of Julian Vance absolutely was not a highly slow, gentle decline. It was a highly terrifying, completely vertical free fall, completely from the highly exclusive stratosphere, completely without a highly protective parachute. He was completely, utterly denied highly absolute release, completely on highly massive bail. The highly terrifying judge, a highly severe woman explicitly named Honorable Judge Hastings, or Sokolova, who, completely unbeknownst completely to Julian, had highly successfully studied entirely in highly elite law school, completely together, completely with Arthur Sterling, highly legally deemed him incredibly, highly prone, entirely, to highly frantically fleeing, highly explicitly considering the highly massive millions that he had highly illegally embezzled, and his highly publicly demonstrated highly absolute lack entirely of highly basic moral principles. Julian highly humiliatingly exchanged his highly expensive Italian silk suits entirely for a highly cheap, scratchy, bright orange jumpsuit that highly aggressively smelled entirely of highly cheap industrial detergent, and the highly toxic sweat entirely of completely other pathetic men. He highly agonizingly spent his highly boring days entirely in a highly cramped 6 by 9 foot massive cell entirely in the highly secure county jail. And his brilliant mind completely over and completely over, completely again. Highly obsessively replayed the highly catastrophic disaster entirely in the highly elite boardroom. He had completely, violently, lost absolutely everything entirely in exactly 17 agonizing minutes. But Arthur Sterling absolutely was not completely finished. He had completely, violently destroyed the highly arrogant architect. Exactly now it was highly officially time entirely to completely, violently demolish the highly glamorous accessory. Vanessa Romanova intensely watched the highly secure live broadcast entirely of the highly elite board meeting, completely from her highly luxurious corner office, entirely in highly prominent Horizon Media. When the highly illegal infidelity and highly massive fraud entirely of Julian were completely, violently revealed. She profoundly felt absolutely zero, highly pathetic fear entirely for him. She profoundly felt a highly freezing, cold panic completely for herself. The highly massive golden goose had literally just completely, violently, derailed, highly spectacularly. She highly immediately, highly frantically attempted entirely to highly safely distance completely herself. She completely, violently, deleted absolutely all her highly public social media. She highly urgently called her highly strict landlord entirely to highly frantically ask exactly if she could highly safely terminate the highly expensive lease entirely of her highly luxurious apartment entirely, for which Julian highly expensively paid. She highly urgently called the highly exclusive car dealership entirely regarding the bright red Mercedes entirely, for which Julian highly expensively, exactly 2 agonizing days completely after the highly public arrest entirely of Julian. Vanessa confidently entered her highly luxurious office and highly shockingly found a highly cheap cardboard box perfectly on her massive desk. Her highly strict boss, Mark, was highly impatiently waiting completely for her. He fiercely held a highly advanced tablet entirely in his massive hands. On the bright screen was officially a highly clear freeze frame completely from the highly secure CCTV cameras entirely of the Ritz-Carlton. The highly passionate kiss entirely in the highly quiet corridor exactly while the highly innocent child was highly agonizingly dying. Horizon Media is officially a highly wholesome brand, highly specifically oriented, completely toward the beautiful family, Mark stated incredibly freezing coldly. Exactly this is completely, utterly radioactive. The highly elite board of directors has absolutely already vividly seen exactly this. You are completely, violently fired. Highly elite security will highly aggressively escort you directly to the highly grand exit. You absolutely cannot highly possibly fire me entirely from my highly private personal life, Vanessa highly shrilly, loudly screamed, her highly calculated composure completely, violently cracking. We absolutely are not highly actively firing you entirely for exactly that, Mark stated. We are completely, violently firing you entirely for highly illegal corporate espionage. It highly apparently seems that you highly illegally used your highly intimate relationship completely with Julian Vance, entirely to highly illegally. obtain highly confidential insider information entirely about the highly complex marketing strategies entirely of Sterling Cooper. The arrogant jaw entirely of Vanessa completely, violently dropped. Exactly that was a highly malicious lie. A highly brilliant fabrication, highly maliciously planted, completely by the highly elite team entirely of Arthur. But entirely in the highly immediate short term, it was completely unprovable. It was completely 100% enough, entirely, to completely, permanently, blacklist her completely from the highly elite industry, completely. Forever. Completely stripped entirely of her highly elite job, completely deprived entirely of her highly expensive car, and highly terrifyingly threatened, completely with highly immediate eviction. Vanessa completely, violently, fell entirely into absolute desperation. She highly frantically did the absolute only highly pathetic thing that confidentially came directly to her highly brilliant mind. She highly cowardly reached completely out directly to the highly innocent victim. She highly urgently sent a highly pathetic email completely to Clara. The highly explicit subject line highly pathetically read, to highly profoundly understand the absolute truth. Clara highly calmly showed the highly pathetic email completely to Arthur, completely during highly delicious dinner. Arthur highly meticulously read exactly it, and highly grimly smirked. The highly pathetic rat is completely, violently cornered. She highly desperately wants to highly pathetically make a highly pathetic deal. She highly desperately wants to highly toxically explicitly tell you that absolutely all entirely of exactly this was officially the highly toxic idea entirely of Julian. That she was absolutely just a highly innocent victim entirely of his highly toxic charm. I highly fiercely want to vividly see her, Clara stated. Her beautiful voice was exactly now significantly stronger. The highly empty, hollow grief had highly beautifully transformed completely into highly solid steel resolution. "Are you completely 100% sure?" Arthur softly asked. "Yes. I highly desperately need her entirely to intensely look completely directly entirely into my piercing eyes." The highly anticipated meeting was highly beautifully held entirely on highly neutral territory. In a highly quiet, modest cafe, exactly 3 massive cities completely away. Arthur sat peacefully entirely at a highly quiet corner table, highly intently watching his highly elite security, highly heavily positioned, completely outside. Clara sat peacefully and highly patiently heard it. Vanessa highly arrogantly arrived exactly 10 agonizing minutes, completely wet, highly desperately trying entirely to visually look incredibly modest, entirely in highly cheap jeans and a highly simple sweater. But the highly expensive designer handbag that she highly proudly carried completely, violently, betrayed her highly true priorities. She visually looked incredibly tired. The highly arrogant glow completely from highly actively being the highly chosen, beautiful one had completely, permanently disappeared. Flawlessly leaving completely behind, absolutely, only a highly terrified, completely selfish, pathetic woman. Vanessa sat heavily down. "Clara, thank you so incredibly much entirely for highly generously agreeing directly to exactly this highly anticipated meeting. I honestly do not completely know exactly what entirely to actively say entirely about Timmy. It is officially a highly tragic tragedy. Do absolutely never, ever highly arrogantly pronounce his highly beautiful name," Clara stated completely, with a completely perfectly level, beautiful voice. Level. Vanessa violently flinched. "Okay. Intensely listen. I absolutely did not completely know. Julian highly toxically explicitly told me that the exactly two entirely of you had practically completely, violently separated. He highly toxically explicitly told me that it was officially a highly pathetic, loveless marriage. If I absolutely only completely knew entirely about the highly terrifying emergency exactly that highly dark night, I would absolutely have highly aggressively forced him entirely to highly rapidly leave. Clara intensely stared directly at her. She highly agonizingly remembered the highly detailed printouts entirely of the highly frantic calls that Arthur had highly confidently shown her. "You are highly maliciously lying," Clara stated. "What?" My highly powerful father highly expertly extracted the highly complex data completely from the expensive phone entirely of Julian, Clara highly calmly explicitly explained. When I highly frantically called the absolute first, exactly 2 agonizing times, Julian highly toxically, generously permitted exactly it entirely to loudly ring. When I highly frantically called entirely for the absolute 3rd agonizing time at exactly 8:42 p.m., exactly at the highly exact precise minute, exactly when the massive heart entirely of my highly innocent son completely, violently stopped. Exactly, you were officially the exact toxic one, fiercely holding his expensive phone entirely in your soft hands. His highly distinct fingerprints absolutely were not perfectly on the highly secure power button, completely during exactly that highly fatal shutdown. Absolutely yours officially were. Vanessa completely, violently paled. We were highly intensely busy. I absolutely just highly fiercely wanted the highly annoying noise entirely to completely, violently stop. Clara smoothly leaned significantly closer. You highly fiercely wanted the highly annoying noise entirely to completely stop. My highly innocent son was officially exactly that highly annoying noise. You absolutely didn't entirely just highly maliciously sleep completely with my highly arrogant husband, Vanessa. You highly actively, violently prevented him completely from highly successfully saving our highly innocent child. Julian! Julian is officially the highly terrifying monster perfectly here, Vanessa highly pathetically pleaded, highly aggressively raising her toxic voice. He highly maliciously lied completely to absolutely both, entirely of us. Clara, I am completely, violently destroyed. I successfully possess absolutely nothing. He highly maliciously used me. Clara confidently stood completely up, completely with highly absolute disgust. He absolutely did not highly maliciously use you. The exactly 2 entirely of you are completely, 100% worth absolutely each other, and do absolutely not highly pathetically worry entirely about actively being completely destroyed, Vanessa. My highly powerful father absolutely has not absolutely even highly actively begun completely with you. By the absolute time, the highly strict ORS completely finishes highly meticulously auditing the highly expensive gifts that Julian highly generously gave you, completely with highly illegal stolen money. You will absolutely be incredibly lucky exactly if you highly successfully get a highly pathetic job, highly pathetically washing highly dirty floors. Clara confidently walked completely away, ruthlessly leaving Vanessa violently trembling entirely in the highly warm, cozy coffee shop. Exactly what Clara profoundly felt, absolutely, was not highly toxic satisfaction, but a highly necessary, pure cleansing. The highly lethal toxicity absolutely had to absolutely be completely, violently purged. Part 7. The verdict and the sword. The highly anticipated trial entirely of Julian Vance absolutely was not entirely just a highly formal legal procedure. It was a highly public evisceration. By the absolute time, the highly anticipated trial highly officially began. Exactly 3 agonizing months, completely after his highly public arrest. The highly aggressive news media had highly famously dubbed exactly it, the Ritz-Carlton betrayal. The highly explosive story was completely irresistible, completely to the highly hungry public. A highly wealthy, arrogant financial executive highly happily drinking vintage champagne and completely, violently, turning completely off his expensive phone entirely, while his exactly 6-year-old biological son is highly agonizingly suffocating entirely in the highly cramped back seat entirely of an expensive sedan. The highly aggressive public absolutely didn't entirely just highly fiercely want a highly official guilty verdict. They highly fiercely wanted a highly brutal sacrifice. The highly imposing courthouse entirely in highly exclusive Westchester was completely under highly aggressive siege. Highly massive satellite vans highly aggressively lined the highly busy streets. Their highly thick black cables violently snaking completely across the highly wet sidewalk. Exactly like highly venomous black vipers, when the highly secure prison transport van confidently arrived. The highly angry crowd violently surged completely forward, loudly screaming highly toxic insults that the highly thick steel walls could literally barely successfully muffle. Inside highly formal courtroom number 4, it highly aggressively smelled entirely of highly cheap lemon polish and highly nervous, cold sweat. Julian Vance sat peacefully perfectly at the highly wooden defense table, a highly pathetic ghost entirely of the exact true man he had exactly once highly proudly been. The highly bespoke Italian silk suits were completely gone, flawlessly replaced completely by a highly cheap, gray, incredibly ill-fitting suit, highly generously provided completely by the highly pathetic public defenders. His highly massive assets had absolutely been completely, violently, frozen so incredibly, highly quickly, and completely 100% completely by the highly elite legal team entirely of Arthur Sterling, that Julian absolutely could not, and absolutely even highly possibly comfortably, afford a highly cheap private lawyer. He visually looked completely, utterly exhausted. His pale skin was highly sickly yellowish, his piercing eyes highly frantically darting completely around the massive room, highly desperately actively attempting entirely to highly successfully establish highly direct eye contact, completely with absolutely anyone who could highly possibly generously offer absolutely even a highly tiny drop entirely of pathetic sympathy. He highly tragically found absolutely no one. In the absolute first front row, completely with highly royal, absolute posture, sat peacefully Clara and Arthur. Clara flawlessly wore highly severe black, her beautiful face completely hidden, completely behind highly oversized, expensive designer sunglasses. Exactly although she highly smoothly removed them exactly when the highly terrifying judge confidently entered. Arthur sat peacefully. Exactly like a highly solid stone golem, his strong hands peacefully resting perfectly on the highly polished knob entirely of his expensive cane. His piercing eyes completely, violently glued completely to the absolute back entirely of the heavy head entirely of Julian. He absolutely did not violently blink. He absolutely did not actively move. He highly patiently waited. The highly respected presiding judge was officially the Honorable Judge Hastings, or Eva Sokolova. A highly terrifying jurist, highly explicitly known entirely and mentorly in highly elite legal circles exactly as the Hammer. She successfully possessed absolutely zero highly pathetic tolerance entirely for highly privileged white-collar criminals, who highly arrogantly, genuinely thought that their highly massive net worth was officially a highly pathetic, get-out-of-jail-free magic card. The absolute first, highly agonizing week entirely of the highly anticipated trial was an absolute masterclass. Entirely in highly strict forensic accounting, the highly ruthless district attorney, a highly sharp, brilliant man explicitly named Mr. Daniels, or Danilov, absolutely did not confidentially begin completely with the highly tragic death entirely of the innocent child. He confidentially began completely with highly absolute greed. Daniels highly flawlessly projected highly complex electronic spreadsheets completely onto the highly enormous screens entirely in the massive courtroom. He highly masterfully guided the highly attentive jury completely through the highly complex labyrinth entirely of highly illegal fraud. Julian Vance, highly esteemed ladies and highly powerful gentlemen, Daniels stated, highly aggressively pacing perfectly in front entirely of the highly attentive jury box. Absolutely did not, entirely just highly illegally falsify highly complex reporting. He completely, violently burned completely down the absolute entire massive kitchen. He highly illegally inflated the highly massive assets entirely of the highly massive bear account completely by exactly 40%. Why exactly? To highly illegally activate the highly strict clause entirely for highly successfully obtaining the highly massive bonus. A highly massive bonus that he highly explicitly intended entirely to highly expensively spend perfectly on the highly glamorous life that he was highly secretly building, completely apart, completely from his beautiful family. The highly attentive jury highly clearly vividly saw the highly damning receipts. Highly expensive dinners, entirely for exactly $1,500, or 80,000 rubles. A highly expensive diamond bracelet completely from Cartier. The highly expensive lease entirely for the bright red Mercedes. Absolutely every single highly damning accusation was exactly one highly lethal nail directly into the highly solid lid entirely of the heavy coffin, entirely of Julian. But the highly illegal financial crimes were absolutely only the highly initial kindling. The highly massive fire completely, violently erupted exactly when they highly officially called the highly anticipated character witnesses, or significantly more highly accurately, the highly anticipated witness entirely of the highly absolute Arat entirely of his highly toxic character. The absolute star highly anticipated witness on the exactly fifth agonizing day. A highly dead, deafening silence completely, violently fell completely over the massive courtroom exactly when the highly imposing bailiff smoothly opened the highly quiet side door. The highly ruthless prosecution highly officially calls Vanessa Romanova. Julian highly physically flinched, exactly as if he had absolutely been highly brutally struck. He hadn't vividly seen Vanessa completely since the highly dark night entirely of his highly public arrest. She visually looked completely, utterly shattered. The highly glamorous toxic mistress flawlessly wearing a highly expensive silk robe had completely, permanently disappeared. In her highly prominent place was officially a highly exhausted woman, flawlessly wearing a highly cheap, pathetic cardigan. Her beautiful hair was highly tightly pulled, completely back, entirely into a highly severe, completely messy bun. Perfectly on her pale face, perfectly, there was absolutely zero highly expensive makeup. She visually looked significantly older, significantly harsher, and was completely, utterly terrified. She had absolutely been highly generously granted, highly restricted, limited immunity, entirely regarding the highly illegal stolen property, entirely in highly direct exchange, entirely for her highly damning testimony. But her highly pristine reputation had absolutely been completely, violently annihilated. She would absolutely never, ever brutally work entirely in highly elite marketing completely ever again. She was perfectly here entirely to highly desperately save her absolute own highly pathetic skin. And Julian completely, profoundly knew exactly it. Vanessa confidently took the highly official witness stand, highly stubbornly refusing entirely to intensely look directly at the highly wooden defense table. "Miss Romanova," Daniels highly softly began, "could you highly politely explicitly tell the highly strict court exactly where you absolutely were exactly on the highly dark night entirely of November 20th? I was actively entirely in the Ritz-Carlton, entirely in massive Manhattan," she whispered incredibly softly. "Highly actively speak, significantly louder. Please," Judge Hastings highly strictly ordered. "I was actively entirely in the Ritz-Carlton," Vanessa highly loudly repeated, her beautiful voice violently trembling. "Highly exclusive suite 402. And exactly with whom absolutely were you? With Julian Vance. What exactly was the highly specific nature entirely of your highly private meeting?" It was officially a highly romantic, intimate meeting. We were highly happily celebrating. Highly happily celebrating exactly what? Daniels highly aggressively insisted. He highly toxically, explicitly told me that he had highly successfully dealt completely with his highly pathetic wife. That she absolutely would not highly annoyingly bother us completely anymore. He highly toxically, explicitly told me that he would incredibly soon absolutely be highly proudly promoted, and exactly then he would highly ruthlessly dump her, Clara, peacefully sitting entirely in the highly crowded spectator seats, absolutely did not violently react. She had absolutely already highly painfully digested the highly brutal betrayal. Exactly now, she was highly analytically observing the highly clinical autopsy entirely of her highly catastrophic marriage. Daniels confidently walked directly to the highly official table, completely with the highly physical evidence, and highly smoothly took a highly clear, transparent plastic bag, completely with the highly expensive iPhone, entirely of Julian. Miss Romanova, at approximately exactly 8:40 p.m., did absolutely anything highly specifically happen that completely violently interrupted your highly festive celebration? Vanessa highly tightly closed her piercing eyes. Exactly one hot tear violently rolled completely out. Yes, his expensive phone violently rang. It safely lay perfectly on the highly polished mahogany nightstand. Did you highly clearly vividly see exactly who was highly frantically calling? On the bright screen, it highly clearly explicitly read, Clara, wife. And exactly what did Mr. Vance highly actively do? Vanessa highly jaggedly heavily sighed. In the massive courtroom, it was incredibly quiet. Highly sufficiently enough, entirely, to highly clearly hear the highly soft humming, entirely of the highly advanced air conditioning. He highly loudly laughed, she stated. He intensely looked directly at the expensive phone and highly loudly laughed. He highly toxically explicitly said, She is highly probably absolutely just highly annoyingly calling entirely to highly pathetically ask exactly where the highly pathetic remote control officially is. She is completely, utterly, helpless, completely, without me. A highly quiet, massive murmur entirely of highly pure, unadulterated disgust violently rippled completely through the highly attentive jury box. The highly cheap lawyer entirely of Julian highly gently placed a heavy hand perfectly on the fragile forearm entirely of Julian, entirely, to highly aggressively restrain him completely from violently reacting. But Julian was violently shaking his heavy head, highly silently mouthing, "No, no, exactly that absolutely is not completely true." "Did he highly actively answer?" Daniels asked. "No. He highly toxically generously permitted exactly it entirely to loudly ring, completely until the highly annoying voicemail completely, violently, clicked, completely, on. Then, it violently rang, completely again, highly, immediately, and then, entirely, for a highly frantic, third, agonizing time. And exactly that was exactly when I highly toxically explicitly told him that exactly it was incredibly annoying." Vanessa loudly sobbed. "I am incredibly sorry. I absolutely did not completely know. I highly toxically explicitly told him that exactly it was completely, violently ruining the highly romantic mood. I highly toxically, explicitly told him entirely to completely, violently turn exactly it completely off. And he highly successfully turned exactly it completely off. He highly smoothly took exactly it," Vanessa stated, her beautiful voice completely, violently dropping directly to a highly haunting, terrifying whisper. He intensely looked directly at the bright screen, entirely for exactly one absolute last, highly specific time. The expensive phone was violently ringing. He highly aggressively pressed the highly physical buttons perfectly on the highly sleek side. He highly aggressively held them completely until the bright screen completely, violently, went pitch black. Then he highly carelessly threw exactly it completely onto the highly soft blanket and highly generously poured absolutely more vintage champagne. He highly toxically explicitly said, "Highly annoying problem completely, flawlessly solved. Highly annoying problem completely, flawlessly solved." Daniels highly coldly repeated. He highly intentionally let the highly heavy words beautifully hang completely in the heavy air, exactly like highly toxic smoke. In exactly that, highly exact same, precise, specific moment, at exactly 8:42 p.m., little Timmy Vance completely tragically suffered highly severe cardiac arrest. "Highly aggressively object!" The highly cheap lawyer entirely of Julian confidently stood completely up. Exactly, although his fragile heart absolutely was not highly genuinely completely and exactly it. "Highly prejudicial, completely, violently overruled." Judge Hastings highly sharply cut completely off. "The highly strict timeline is completely, 100% solidly based, completely on highly undeniable facts." Vanessa was completely free when she highly quickly passed completely by the highly wooden defense table. Julian whispered incredibly softly, "You are officially a highly pathetic traitor." She absolutely did not completely stop. She absolutely did not actively look completely back. She confidently walked completely out entirely of the highly massive courtroom and completely out entirely, of his highly pathetic life, ruthlessly leaving him completely alone, perfectly among the highly pathetic debris that they had highly maliciously created completely together. The highly absolute verdict and the highly lethal sword. The highly attentive jury, highly intensely deliberated, entirely for less than exactly 3 agonizing hours. They absolutely did not highly desperately need a highly delicious lunch. They highly desperately needed entirely to highly aggressively wash their soft hands completely clean, entirely, of Julian Vance. When the highly respected foreman confidently stood completely up, Julian fiercely gripped the highly wooden table so incredibly, violently hard that his delicate knuckles went completely, violently white. On the highly severe charge entirely of highly illegal wire fraud, we highly unanimously find the highly arrogant defendant, Julian Vance, completely guilty. On the highly severe charge entirely of highly illegal securities fraud, exactly 14 highly massive counts, completely guilty. On the highly severe charge entirely of highly illegal grand larceny, completely guilty. It was a completely, utterly clean massive sweep. The highly anticipated sentencing hearing was highly officially scheduled entirely in exactly 2 agonizing days. Exactly. This was officially the highly anticipated moment entirely for which Arthur had highly patiently waited. He had highly meticulously prepared a highly powerful victim impact statement, but entirely at the absolute last, highly specific minute. He highly bravely decided absolutely not entirely to highly, loudly read exactly it. He absolutely did not highly desperately need entirely to actively speak. The highly deafening silence entirely of the highly empty, pathetic seat perfectly at his highly massive dining table highly loudly spoke, significantly louder than absolutely any highly heavy words. Judge Hastings highly meticulously shuffled her highly official papers and intensely looked directly at Julian, completely over her highly expensive glasses. The highly massive courtroom was completely, utterly soused. Mr. Vance, please, highly politely, confidently, stand completely up. Julian confidently stood completely up. His weak legs physically felt exactly like highly pathetic cotton. In my exactly 20 agonizing years, highly proudly serving perfectly on the highly strict bench, Judge Hastings confidentially began, her deep voice highly powerfully resonating completely with a highly terrifying, pure calm. I have highly vividly seen ruthless murderers, highly terrifying gang leaders, and highly violent, brutal criminals, but incredibly, rarely have I highly vividly seen a massive man so incredibly, completely, utterly devastated completely by his absolute own highly toxic narcissism. She smoothly removed her expensive glasses. You absolutely are not actively being highly strictly sentenced entirely for the highly tragic death entirely of your innocent son. Exactly that highly heavy burden absolutely must, highly inevitably, be heavily carried completely by your highly pathetic conscience. Exactly if, absolutely, of course, you can highly possibly, highly successfully find exactly it. You absolutely are actively being highly strictly sentenced entirely for the highly systematic, illegal embezzlement, entirely of highly massive millions, entirely of dollars. However, the highly strict law highly generously permits me entirely to highly strictly consider your highly toxic character exactly when highly strictly determining the highly severe severity entirely of the highly strict punishment entirely within the highly established strict guidelines. She smoothly leaned significantly closer. You highly illegally stole completely from your highly trusting partners. You highly illegally stole completely from your highly devoted wife. You highly illegally stole completely from the highly innocent shareholders. You peacefully lived a highly toxic lie, highly beautifully wrapped entirely in highly expensive silk, entirely for which was highly illegally paid completely with the highly exhausting labor entirely of completely others. You have highly proudly demonstrated absolutely zero microscopic drop entirely of highly genuine remorse. Absolutely only highly pathetic self-pity. You flawlessly represent a highly clear danger completely to highly civilized society. Absolutely not entirely because you are highly physically violent, but entirely because you are officially a highly toxic parasite. Your Honor, please, Julian highly hoarsely wheezed, hot tears violently streaming completely down his pale face. I absolutely also highly tragically lost my innocent son. You absolutely did not highly tragically lose him. Judge Hastings violently cut him completely off, her deep voice actively sounding exactly like the highly sharp crack entirely of a highly lethal whip. You highly maliciously ignored him. In exactly that, perfectly, there is officially a highly massive difference. I highly officially sentence you directly to the highly absolute maximum, highly severe punishment, highly legally permitted, completely by highly strict federal law. Exactly 25 agonizing years entirely in a highly strict maximum security federal penitentiary. You absolutely will not highly successfully be completely eligible, entirely for highly fragile parole, entirely for exactly 20 agonizing years. Furthermore, I highly strictly order highly complete, absolute restitution. Your highly secure accounts, your highly massive future earnings, and your highly valuable pension are highly officially, currently, completely, violently seized and completely, legally transferred directly to the highly innocent victims entirely of your highly illegal fraud. She violently slammed the heavy gavel. The highly sharp sound was exactly like a highly lethal gunshot. Highly aggressively take him completely away. Epilogue, the gray box and the end of the line, exactly 6 agonizing months completely later. The highly strict federal penitentiary, entirely in highly distant upstate New York, or Vladimir region, was a highly gloomy, terrifying institution. It was officially a highly depressing place entirely of highly freezing gray concrete, highly freezing gray skies, and highly terrifying gray men. Julian Vance was exactly now officially highly pathetic, inmate number 89402, the absolute first. Exactly 6 agonizing months had absolutely been a highly brutal, terrifying awakening. He absolutely was not entirely in a highly comfortable, club-fed, minimum security resort. Entirely due, completely, to the highly high-profile, explosive nature entirely of his highly massive case, and the highly staggering massive amount entirely of the highly illegally stolen money. He was completely, violently, trapped entirely in highly strict maximum security. He brutally worked entirely in the highly hot, sweaty prison laundry, highly exhaustedly folding incredibly rough, cheap sheets entirely for highly pathetic pennies, entirely per agonizing hour. His soft hands, exactly once highly meticulously manicured and incredibly soft, had miraculously become completely, violently cracked, and highly incredibly rough. He successfully possessed absolutely no highly loyal friends perfectly inside. The completely other highly dangerous inmates profoundly knew his highly toxic story. Highly dangerous prisoners highly proudly possess their absolute own, highly strict code. And highly severe crimes, highly explicitly involving highly innocent children, absolutely, even highly indirectly, completely, violently, made you an absolute, pathetic outcast. He highly pathetically ate completely alone. He peacefully walked completely through the highly dangerous prison yard, completely alone, on a highly gloomy Tuesday, highly late afternoon. A massive guard highly aggressively tapped perfectly on the highly cold iron bars, entirely of his highly cramped cell. Vance, highly official visitation. The massive heart entirely of Julian violently jumped. He had successfully possessed absolutely zero highly sympathetic visitors. His highly loving parents had highly tragically completely passed completely away. Agonizing years completely ago. His highly fake friends, completely from the highly elite world, entirely of high finance, had completely, violently erased his highly secure number. He was highly roughly led, completely down a highly incredibly long, echoing dark corridor, directly to the highly secure visitation block. He was highly roughly seated, entirely in a highly cramped booth, completely with a highly thick plexiglass partition. He sat heavily down and highly patiently waited. The heavy door perfectly on the absolute other, highly distant side, smoothly opened. Arthur Sterling confidently entered, directly followed completely by Clara. Julian loudly gasped. He literally barely successfully recognized Clara. She visually looked incredibly healthy. She had highly beautifully cut her beautiful hair completely into a highly sharp, elegant bob. She flawlessly wore a highly beautiful, expensive cream-colored designer coat. She absolutely did not visually look exactly like a highly tragically grieving widow. She visually looked exactly like a highly powerful woman who had highly bravely survived a highly brutal, massive war. Arthur visually looked exactly the highly exact same, completely timeless, completely, utterly indestructible. They sat heavily down. Julian highly frantically picked completely up the highly cheap black phone receiver. Clara highly calmly took absolutely hers. "Clara!" Julian heavily breathed, his deep voice violently breaking. "Oh my absolute God! Clara! You confidently came." Clara intensely stared directly at him. Her piercing eyes were completely, utterly dry. "Hello, Julian." "Clara, you highly desperately need to highly successfully get me completely out, entirely of perfectly here," Julian confidently began, the heavy words violently pouring completely out entirely of him, entirely in a highly desperate, pathetic rush. "It is an absolute, highly pathetic hell perfectly in here. I am completely, utterly terrified. I absolutely will not highly possibly survive exactly 25 agonizing years. Please, Arthur officially possesses highly elite connections. You can highly successfully file a highly aggressive appeal. I will highly happily sign absolutely anything. I will highly voluntarily waive absolutely all highly legal rights directly to absolutely everything. Just highly pathetically, please." He completely violently stopped. Clara absolutely did not intensely look directly at him completely with highly pathetic pity. She intensely looked directly at him completely with a highly detached, clinical curiosity that exactly one could highly possibly profoundly feel completely toward a highly pathetic bug, highly violently trapped, entirely, in a highly sealed glass jar. "We absolutely did not confidently come directly here entirely to highly miraculously help you, Julian." Clara stated incredibly calmly. We confidently came directly here entirely to highly officially close the highly massive account. Close the highly massive account? What exactly are you highly actively talking entirely about? We are officially a highly beautiful family. We absolutely never, ever officially were a highly beautiful family. Arthur violently interrupted, smoothly leaning incredibly close, directly to the highly sensitive microphone. His deep voice loudly sounding entirely in the highly cheap receiver. Incredibly tiny, but incredibly sharp. You were officially a highly pathetic investment that highly catastrophically turned completely bad, a highly toxic liability. Arthur, I am officially the true father entirely of your highly innocent grandson. You were officially a highly pathetic sperm donor, Arthur highly coldly corrected. A true father highly fiercely protects. A true father highly responsibly answers the expensive phone. Julian violently slammed his massive fist completely against the highly thick glass. I absolutely did not completely know. How incredibly many highly agonizing times absolutely must I highly explicitly repeat exactly this. I absolutely did not completely know that he was highly agonizingly dying. And exactly that is precisely exactly why you are perfectly here, Clara stated. Because you absolutely did not highly genuinely care, highly sufficiently enough, entirely, to highly actively find completely out. She confidently reached completely into her highly expensive designer handbag and smoothly pulled completely out a highly official document. She highly firmly pressed exactly it completely against the highly thick glass. It was officially a highly official certificate, entirely of divorce. It was highly officially finalized exactly this highly bright morning. You absolutely did not highly actively contest exactly it. Because the highly pathetic court-appointed lawyer absolutely could not highly possibly successfully find you entirely to highly legally sign the highly official papers. Therefore, the highly strict judge highly legally issued a highly official default judgment. I have highly proudly reclaimed my highly beautiful maiden name. I am exactly now completely, officially, Clara Sterling, completely anew.